I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of Australia and their connections to land, sea, sky, and community. I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples listening today.
Hello, my love, and welcome to the April and Fritz podcast. I am so happy that you're here. I'm not going to lie to you, I am a little bit tired today. I am. I think you can probably even hear it in my voice if I'm being honest. But if you are watching the video, you may see that I look like I haven't slept. And in all honesty, I haven't really. That's because my mind was honestly racing thinking about the podcast topic today. I ended up getting out of bed at maybe around 1 a.m. to write down my ideas. And before I knew it, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. And then I had to get up at 5:30 to go to the markets this morning and then come back and obviously record the podcast. So she's a little bit tired, but also really excited to get stuck into this topic because I do think it is a juicy one. And today I'm going to be talking about breaking up with your vendors. And there are a few times, I think, when it becomes obvious that it's time to part ways, and it's never easy. I don't care what anybody says. It is never easy. And quite frankly, it's never wanted. Nobody goes into an engagement with a vendor thinking that it's going to not go well. You go in there as best prepared as you possibly can be. So you might be wondering, why am I even thinking about this topic? And truth be told, I've been reflecting quite a lot on a relationship that I had with a vendor at the beginning stages of my business. I engaged them to set up some systems and processes and all of that kind of thing on the back end of my business. And honestly, that went south pretty quickly. I'm not going to lie to you, because they didn't deliver on what they said they were going to deliver on in the time frame that they agreed to deliver it in. I have really been sitting in a bit of contemplation about this and have really been reflecting on what exactly went wrong and what I could have done differently, really, to save myself a whole lot of heartache and a whole lot of stress and a whole lot of headaches. And I've been thinking about this experience quite a lot because I think that there is so much that I can share here with you from my own experience, just personally and professionally. And I want to share that all with you so that you can avoid the mistakes that I did and find your people, find the vendors that you dream of working with. And ultimately that will lead to an incredible event for you. And I'll be honest, I've been fortunate enough that I've never actually had anyone break up with me in my floral design business, and nor have I ever had to break up with any of my clients because, look, honestly, I've done a lot of work around trying to attract people into my world who are just the dream. And if you're in my world, then you already know that you're a dream. But I have had clients who have had experiences with vendors, broken up with them, and then ended up coming to me. And it was not a fun experience, not for anyone involved, mostly because the couple themselves, the trust was gone. And I think that rightly or wrongly, that rebuilding of the trust really fell as to be my responsibility rather than the responsibility of the previous vendor. And again, is that fair? Who knows? But it was what it was. And so I think that there is a lot of different reasons as to why this happens, and just a few. It could be a difference in expectations, or it could be that they didn't deliver what they said they were going to do, or they don't communicate with you. Whatever it is, pick your thing. Your relationship with your vendor is so incredibly important. I cannot stress this enough. You are relying on them to provide you with a product or a service, and that is built on trust. When you get a product, you trust that it's going to be a certain quality level. When you engage a service, you expect a certain level of service as part of that. And when that trust is broken, the whole relationship breaks down. And listen, I genuinely believe that there's nothing that can't be resolved, even if that resolution is actually walking away. But particularly when you're running something like an event that requires just so many people and so many moving pieces to come together perfectly, to me, it is just not worth the risk, to be honest. And this is not me saying that you should go out and be critical of every single vendor or your vendor's every single move. But instead, what I am suggesting is that a healthy level of commitment and understanding from both the client and the vendor is really important to a successful event together. But you will know when something isn't right. I trust that you have a level of common sense about you to know when things aren't right. So before moving into the action of this episode, I would just preface this whole conversation with saying that I would strongly suggest checking in to see if you have any contractual obligations to your vendors. There's often guidance in terms of how to manage disputes or what the process is to dissolve the contract in the contract itself. So it's important to note, I guess, that I am not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be. I don't want to be a lawyer either. And so what I'm going to be talking about in this episode is really based on my own personal and professional experience. Of course, if you are seeking that legal advice, I would strongly recommend that you reach out to your respective law firm and have that conversation. But again, I am, as always, so excited that you're here and spending your earbud time with me. I would love, love, love it if you subscribe to the podcast, as we do release new episodes every week. And so far, the podcast has been so well received, and I am just so incredibly grateful to each and every single person that's listening. So let's go. Okay, so I'm sure that you all want to know about this experience that I had at the beginning stages of my business. And you're probably thinking, you hired someone to do some back-end stuff. Like, what exactly has that got to do with event planning? But the truth is, what I'm talking about today could certainly be extrapolated out to other vendors in your life, from tradies to contractors to whoever that you're actually working with to bring your event to life. So as I said, I was in the early stages of my business and I hired a specialist to create and manage the back end of my client relationship system, Dubsado. And if there are any creatives listening, then you may have heard of that. But in short, when you submit an inquiry with my business, April and Fritz, the idea is that you're then taken through a workflow or a process based on your event type. So for example, if you submit an inquiry for a private event like a birthday, the process that you're taken through is a little bit different to the process that a client who is going through a wedding inquiry process would take. And I hired this person, but this was mistake number one. I shouldn't have hired them. I think hindsight is great. And what I've come to reflect on was that I was moving from a place of desperate energy. I had inquired with a few different specialists, and for different reasons, they weren't the perfect fit. I had found someone that I was really happy with, but they were going to be going traveling for a few months, and so they were unavailable. They actually referred me on to someone else who they trusted. And so I thought, perfect, let's meet them and see how that goes. Time was ticking by and I'd met this individual. And if I'm being totally honest, I just wanted the job done. I think I was starting to get a little bit impatient at this point, and I didn't ask too many questions around what the process, how long the process was, and whether or not they were going to be a good fit for my business. And ultimately, I landed on, can they do the job? Yes or no? And I determined yes. Based on the referral and from what I had seen. So I decided to move forward. But I think there is something to be said for this energy of, I just need the job done. When we have our blinders on like that, I just don't think that we make the best decisions for anything in life. It doesn't have to be about, for example, my business. It could absolutely be about your event. If you're meeting with vendors and you're coming from a place of that desperate energy, you are more than likely not going to be making a very good decision. I don't have evidence to suggest that this is the case, but if you've ever had an experience like this, then you'll probably be able to reflect back and see that, yeah, okay, I did move from that kind of energy. And every time that I've done that in my life, there's always been some kind of consequence to it. So maybe that is the first lesson, is moving from a place of neutrality, being able to hold back your emotions. Like I said, I was probably just being quite impatient, and critically look at something or someone who's offering a service and think, is this going to be the best fit for me? And to be honest with you, everything started out quite good. I was being moved through their process, and I noticed that things were ticking along quite smoothly to begin with. And when it came time to sit down and actually go through the plan together, there was internet issues, and then a daughter was sick, and then they couldn't make it anymore because they were stuck in traffic or whatever it was, and they just became incredibly flaky. So mistake number 2 for me was, I am a recovering people pleaser. I think that this person had good intentions, but ultimately I should have started questioning things at that point, because it was really a sign of what was to come. I realized that whenever this person asked me for an extension, a reschedule, a whatever, then I was always like, yeah, no worries, all good, reschedule whenever you can, like no rush. And again, if you are a recovering people pleaser, like please raise your hand, because I see you and I feel you. And I think ultimately what it came down to was that I didn't want them to think that I was being annoying or disappointing them in some way, which sounds ridiculous. But the reality was this: I was the business owner and I paid for the service in full and had expected more progress at this point in time. Instead of saying something, I really took a back seat and let this behavior continue. And when you let this kind of behavior continue, there is no consequence. And that's dangerous because it very quickly spirals out of control, which it did. And we'll get to that shortly. But I do also want to caveat this conversation by saying that even though I am a people pleaser, I do also try and always see the best in people. And you do never know what someone is going through. But what I also believe is that you can be firm and fair when it's appropriate. But I think what got in the way there was my own people-pleasing tendencies, and I just let these things slide one after the other. And so it was coming towards the end of our project, and we had a handover date. Everything was locked in, ready to go. And I was so excited to have this handed over. At this point, it had been 4 months, and we had met to discuss the plans. As far as I was concerned, it was all just being implemented. But the night before the handover, I get an email saying that this person had been sick for 3 weeks. They had outsourced my project to another specialist in order to get it done. And the work that other specialist had provided was not satisfactory, so they had to cancel because they needed more time to work on it. Again, this was the night before the handover. Going back to those people-pleasing tendencies, I said it was okay and that it was cool, but what's going on here? When can I expect a new date? When can we get this thing sorted? This is obviously impacting my client experience, which was so important to me, and it still is. And then I essentially got ghosted. And so this is where lesson number 3 really came in for me, which was communication. And this one is so big for me. I personally believe that there is power in over-communicating. I know that's not everybody's style, and I know that's not going to suit every client either, but there is nothing worse than being kept in the dark about what's going on with your own event, your own project, your own whatever. Communication is so important to building trust in a relationship, and trust is the foundation of any successful vendor-client relationship. And so in the end, I actually had to pursue some legal action to put them on notice because I didn't hear from them for another couple of weeks. And fast forward another month and the project was still not done. So again, it's easy to see how things got a little bit out of control. I certainly learned my lesson, let's just say that. So today I want to go a little bit deeper on this experience so that you can avoid the mistakes that I made throughout this whole process of engaging with this vendor. And although they're not specific to the events industry, I believe that the lessons that I'm going to be sharing with you today really do translate to any vendor that you're looking to engage. I also think it's worth mentioning here too that although I was very certain about the kind of service and the level of service that I wanted to provide my clients, this experience really solidified just how important that was for me and my business. I never, even to this day, want my clients to have an experience like what I went through when partnering with my business or myself. Honestly, in that time, I really did think I got scammed. And that was quite scary for me. I was a new business owner. It was my first really big spend on my business to get this whole thing set up. Again, with my intention being to give my clients the best possible experience. And it all just fell apart. So I want to talk to you about what you can learn from my experience and what I would do differently so that you don't have to make the same mistakes that I did. And again, you can find those dream vendors, the people who are going to be speaking to your soul and who have a level of respect for you that is unparalleled. So even though that example that I just spoke about wasn't specific to the event industry, I'm going to be talking about vendors for the event industry in this episode. And I just really want to start by prefacing this conversation with ultimately, you are solely responsible for choosing your vendors. You are responsible for how you engage with them, how you engage them, and any other details. If something isn't quite right, you have to call it out. You have to. You are the one who decides who comes into your world and who doesn't. How you go about deciding that, I will leave up to you. I do have some suggestions in this episode as well. But for a vendor to engage with you in the first place, you have had to have reached out to them. So again, if something doesn't feel right, you have to call it out. A vendor with the right intentions will appreciate your honesty and act with integrity. A vendor that isn't in it for the right reasons won't, and then you'll know exactly what to do. But it's really up to you to take that first step to call things out before they get out of control. Maybe they shouldn't have done whatever they've done, but you need to have the courage to say something to make it right early in the piece and move forward together as one unit. And so I guess reflecting on this situation, and if I'm just being really honest with myself, I think I knew that there were some red flags. There's often some telltale signs long before you get to the point of actually breaking up with a vendor, just like in a romantic relationship. You don't just suddenly turn around one day and say that it's over. It's often an accumulation of things over time, and it just gets to a breaking point. So when I'm searching for vendors of any kind for any project or any initiative in my life or my business, if any of the following happens, it's an automatic no from me. You have to say something. I look for these things not only in the vendors that I'm looking to hire, but when I'm also in consultations with my clients to see if they have any of these behaviors, because again, it is an automatic no from me. And this is not just based on the story that I shared earlier, but it's also based on the experiences that I've had from engaging lots of different vendors from all different facets of my life over time. So first and foremost, disrespect. At no point should you feel disrespected by your vendor. This seems silly because you would almost expect to be just treated with respect up front, but it's not always like this. Not all vendors will respect you, your decisions, your way of life, whatever it is. And a great example of this is for folks in the LGBTIQ plus community. If you're having conversations with a vendor and you feel uncomfortable at any stage, for example, maybe they're using the wrong pronouns, walk away. It really is important to trust your intuition with these things. And there are plenty of other vendors out there who would be lucky to have you as part of their special day. Like my business, I would love you. The second thing is going back to that idea of desperate energy. This really feels like the sleazy sales tactics for those creepy car salesmen or that kind of thing who really promise you the world and then you end up with nothing. The types, and you know what they're going to be like to deal with. If you get the sense that your vendor is on the other end hounding you to close the deal or just telling you whatever it is that you want to hear, then there's a fair chance that they're not in it for the right reasons. There is a big difference, I think, between communicating, which I'll get to shortly, but when they're like, here you go, sign, please sign, okay, give us your money, then I think it's wise to take a step back and assess the situation before signing any documents, before paying any money, reading those terms and conditions carefully so that you understand what you're getting yourself into. If you have questions, your vendor who has the right intentions will always be open to hearing you on this. I would say that if you do have any questions, for example, on the clauses and you want to discuss them further, then you can absolutely do that. Again, a vendor with the best of intentions will be really happy to have that conversation with you so that you feel comfortable versus somebody who is just, oh, it's just this thing, please just sign, you're done, get out, on to the next. So on the communication piece, I do just want to caveat here that there's nothing wrong with your vendor following up with you, particularly if you are taking maybe a little bit longer to reply or to respond, or they're waiting to hear from you to confirm something before moving, on with other clients and that kind of thing. And that's not desperate energy. That is communicating. And I think the context is always really important. But like I said, if it's that kind of pay now and get this off and we'll throw in this for free or that for free, it does, I think, a healthy level of skepticism to figure out what exactly that's trying to tell you is a good thing. And then last but not least, of course, is the lack of communication. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a big one for me, especially if you've paid money. If you have exchanged funding, if you have exchanged cash, at that point, it's fair that you're being communicated with. Even if it is that your vendor is telling you, hey, you're not going to hear from me for a little while, I'm going to be off doing X, Y, Z, that's fine. That's communicating. Your expectations are managed. And as long as you have a means to actually connect with them, whether it be a phone or an email or a form or whatever, that's okay. But communication is so important to building trust in a relationship. They have told you so that your expectations are managed. And as long as you have a means to be able to connect with them, then I think that's okay. Communication is so important to building trust in a relationship. And that's what you are doing. You are building a relationship with your vendor. And trust really is the foundation of any successful vendor and client relationship. Without it, it just simply doesn't work. So when do you know if it's time to actually speak to your vendor or actually break up with them? Of course, I think your first action should always be to address it directly with your vendor. I don't believe that we should be jumping from one potential mistake or misunderstanding to breaking. That's not what I'm saying at all. But what I am saying is that your vendor must make a commitment to you and deliver against that commitment. If you find yourself questioning your vendor's integrity, if you find yourself questioning their reliability or their sincerity, it's a pretty significant red flag. And there's a couple of key factors that I would be thinking about when bringing it up with your vendor. First and foremost, your tolerance. As I was saying earlier, I think my patience was running out. Just because my patience was running out and I decided to jump the gun maybe and get into that engagement doesn't mean that you would have. And so I think everyone's tolerance for certain behaviors or issues really does vary. I would really encourage you to reflect on how much you are willing to tolerate from a vendor before it becomes unacceptable. If you find yourself constantly frustrated or consistently disappointed or uncomfortable with the vendor, it may be a sign that it's time to have a pretty serious discussion, or it's time to part ways, depending on how much this has actually been happening. The other thing to think about too is your time. Consider how this vendor's actions or performance or lack of those two things have affected the time and schedule of your event, as well as your own time. Delays, missing deadlines, or poor communication can ultimately disrupt the event planning process, and this can have a flow-on effect to so many other vendors. And this understandably causes so much unnecessary stress. And if the vendor consistently fails to meet your expectations or causes disruptions to the event timeline, these kinds of things, it is definitely time to have a discussion. It's also worth considering your gut feeling. I have definitely spent a lot more time getting better at listening to my intuition. I used to spend a lot more time looking at data and facts and evidence, but sometimes I honestly believe that you just need to go into your own body and listen to what it is trying to tell you. Your intuition can give you so many valuable insights into the health of that relationship with your vendor. And if you have that kind of persistent feeling of unease or discomfort or dissatisfaction or anything like that with your vendor, I always recommend trusting your instincts. Your intuition can alert you to maybe some underlying issues or warning signs that you may not be immediately aware of. And if I'm being completely honest with myself, I think that I knew that this person wasn't the right one, but because I was moving from that desperate energy, I ignored that gut feeling. And yeah, didn't really work out for me. Another thing to think about too is if you have had repeated issues, if you've actually addressed these concerns with your vendor and it's still happening or it's happened multiple times without a clear resolution, the vendor is probably not the right fit for you. When you are continuously encountering the same problems, again, it breaks down that trust and the confidence that you actually have in that person. And again, last but certainly not least, lack of progress or improvement. If you have made every effort to address the concerns and provide feedback and the vendor still shows little to no improvement in their performance or their behavior, it really does suggest a lack of commitment on their behalf. Or it could also be a lack of capability, potentially as well. Maybe they're not capable of meeting what's required of them. Maybe they've bitten off more than they can chew. But continually investing time and resources into a vendor who fails to deliver time and time again can have probably the biggest impact on the success of your event. Okay, maybe some of those things are hitting home. Maybe you have a vendor in mind, or maybe it's just like giving you a pretty sound feeling inside. But to bring it up with your vendor, I really suggest the following. Again, I just want to preface this section by saying that I'm not a lawyer, but I would strongly encourage you to review your contract with any of your vendors, as different vendors have different ways of going about settling disputes or different ways of understanding how to move forward with you. So first and foremost, I would recommend scheduling a meeting or a call. This is a dedicated time for you to discuss your concerns with your vendor. And I think the benefit of having something like a dedicated time allows you both to focus on the conversation without the distractions. Both of you have to, I think, be willing to have an open and honest conversation with the goal to understand what's actually going on and to find a suitable solution. If that doesn't work, or if you make the decision to end the vendor relationship, I would be preparing some key points to communicate during that conversation. Sometimes when you decide to terminate that relationship, it can come as quite a shock to the vendor themselves. So it is worth anticipating some potential reactions from them and then how you would plan to respond. The next thing is that I would be super specific and objective. When you have identified the issue, whatever that is for you, clearly outline those issues that you've encountered. clearly outline the issues that you encountered with examples and some facts. By sticking to the facts and how the vendor's actions or lack of actions have impacted your event, then it's going to be a far less emotive conversation. And a great way to get facts or data is actually from your contract. For example, the contract states that you were going to deliver within this timeline, but you delivered within this timeline. Again, that's not an emotive statement, it's a fact. The next thing is that I would use I statements. So when you use I statements, it really allows you to take ownership of your own experience and perspectives. So for example, I've noticed that there have been delays in the delivery rather than something like, you're always late with your deliveries. When you don't use I statements, it instantly puts the other person on the back foot because they feel like they're being attacked. And you definitely want to avoid personal attacks because it will never end, I can promise you. If you do get to that point, I would suggest offering some constructive feedback on why the relationship is no longer viable. And again, really focus on those specific issues or concerns that have really led to that decision. The next thing is that you need to actively listen in this time. It is important that both parties get to share their perspectives and experiences, and it is important that it's not just you speaking the whole time, but the vendor also needs to have the opportunity to give some explanations as to why the issues have been raised. One technique that I love to do is actually paraphrase back and seek clarification when I need it. So for example, if they say something and then I paraphrase it back to them, I'm like, did I hear that correctly? Then there is no room for miscommunication because ultimately they should be telling you exactly what it is. The next thing is that you really need to be willing to collaborate on finding some solutions. Being willing to collaborate, I think, moves the conversation from placing blame to one that is about finding a solution to the problem at hand. When you collaborate on an action plan, that might include things like specific steps, timelines, responsibilities, all of these kinds of things. And then both parties are actually on the same page about how you're going to be moving forward. If you decide, though, that you need to end the vendor relationship, I would also still suggest being direct and honest. When you clearly communicate your decision without sugarcoating it or beating around the bush, that is really the best way to go. Lastly, I would think about discussing the next steps. I know this conversation is always going to be really difficult, but when we're wrapping it up, don't try and just get off the phone. We need to keep a record of this conversation, including any agreements that you've made. This can really serve as a bit of a reference point for any future interactions and really just ensures accountability. If you decide that you want to terminate the engagement, it's really the next step to outline any logistical details, such as final payments, return of materials, or the transition of responsibilities to another vendor. And it's really important to clarify those expectations for the post-breakup period to really make sure that there is a smooth transition and make sure that your event still goes forward without too much interruption. Just, I think, being the person that I am, I like to also just close that conversation off by acknowledging some positive aspects with the collaboration that I've maybe had with that vendor and express some gratitude for any of their contributions. This, to me, just helps soften the impact of the breakup overall for everyone involved. Nobody wants to leave on a sour note. Even if the situation is sour, you still want to be able to hold your head up high and be able to move forward without tearing people down. So when I look back and when I think about the story that I shared at the beginning of this episode, there were just so many opportunities for me to avoid going down the rabbit hole that I did. I talked a little bit about the mistakes that I made earlier, but what I want to do now is talk about how I could have avoided them or how you can avoid them. But what I want to do now is talk about how you can avoid making such a mess in the first place like I did. In my eyes, investing a little bit more time up front to make sure that you are hiring someone who is the right fit for you, will only pay dividends later. And so, first and foremost, meet in person or virtually before you sign or pay for anything. When you have a face-to-face meeting or a virtual consultation or anything like that, you do get a sense of people's personalities. You get a sense of their professionalism and even just the way that they communicate and their style. And so I think building a personal connection with them can really help establish trust and allow you to assess if this person, this company, this team, whoever it is, are a good fit for your event. Meeting with potential clients for me is a non-negotiable. To me, investing that time in the beginning stages of any engagement will always make the process a lot smoother. There have definitely been times, again, at the beginning stages of my business and this kind of thing where I have skimmed over it or I haven't even bothered with a meeting and those kind of things in the beginning stages because it's been a friend of a friend or that kind of thing. And I've always regretted it because something has always gone on. I think I mentioned it earlier about that kind of intuition, but it's in that time, in that initial meeting, that I'm really tuning into that. And I really encourage my clients to do the same. The next thing is thinking about thoroughly researching your potential vendors. Taking the time to research vendors before engaging their services, things like looking at their portfolio, looking at their reviews, looking at the testimonials and checking their references, gives you a gauge as to the reputation and their reliability. I do just want to caveat that by saying, though, just because someone does have a nice portfolio or maybe does have a reference, doesn't necessarily mean that it's a direct line to them being the best fit for you. But what I am saying is just make sure they have the basics. They have reviews or testimonials or can send you work of a similar event that maybe they've done. Just a little bit of due diligence, I think, can go a really long way in making sure that you're going to be satisfied in the end. Ask detailed questions. When reaching out to potential vendors, ask detailed questions about their experience, about their processes, about their approach to their work and their clients. It's worth asking about their experiences with similar projects or events. See how they speak about their past clients. Listen to what their process is and see if that's something that sounds easy or hard to you. I personally love it when clients are asking me questions. I personally love it when clients are asking me questions during our consultation because it shows me that they are engaged, that they are invested in this conversation. And I know that clients who come into my world are just so self-led and incredible humans as it is. So honestly, I expect it. I expect questions, and so should all of your other vendors. The next thing is to request transparent pricing and contracts. Your vendor should be able to give you transparent pricing information upfront, including any additional fees or charges that might apply. So here, it's really important to review contracts carefully to make sure that they align with your expectations and clearly define timelines, deliverables, responsibilities, all of these kinds of things. And this is exactly why we have investment guides at April and Fritz. It is pretty simple. We want to be transparent. There shouldn't be any surprises. If the vendor is giving you roundabout answers or is maybe stumbling over their numbers to get you a quote, I think a healthy level of criticism is not a bad thing. I will caveat here because if you've listened to any of the previous episodes, you'll know that when someone asks, me how much florals cost for an event, I will always say that it depends. And that is true. It does depend on the items, the number of those items, the abundance, the travel and the labor required to bring it to life. So whilst that may seem counter to what I'm saying, even if your vendor can't give you an exact price, while you're on the call with them on that initial meeting, you would expect to be sent a quote that is easy to understand and itemized so you can see exactly what you're paying for, where and when. And lastly, I'm going to touch on this again, but trust your instincts. Pay attention to your gut when interacting with any kind of potential vendor. If something feels off or maybe you have doubts about their reliability or just anything, it is okay to explore other options. Trusting your instincts can avoid huge headaches down the track. Believe me, trust me, because I've done it. And so I guess knowing when to break up with a vendor is a pretty delicate situation. And it really does, I think, require careful consideration of a lot of different factors there. But remember, your time and your resources are valuable. And it is so important to partner with vendors who align with your values, who communicate effectively and really consistently deliver on their commitments. I think the best advice that I could possibly give you is to create that connection with your vendor, but don't rely on that alone. With all things being equal, the connection with your vendor will help steer you in the right direction, but it is so important to have all of the T's crossed and the I's dotted before engaging with them. So ultimately, it does take a combination of skill and soul and strategy to make a really great vendor. And so I hope you found this episode useful about finding dream vendors and hopefully helps you avoid some potential pitfalls that can have some pretty serious effects on your event. Thank you again for joining me for this episode. I would so love it if you would go ahead and leave 5 stars for this podcast, as it is super helpful to get this podcast out there to other floral and event lovers. I'll see you next time.